Ladies and gentlemen, it is 6:30 p.m. and I'll call this meeting Committee of the Whole to order. Any declaration of interest and general nature thereof? If so, please declare it now. I've got no declarations. So we'll move on to number 3, which is staff reports. Administration report SR-122-21-2022 municipal election voting locations. So the motion reads as follows. Moved by Councillor Fody, seconded by Councillor Jameson, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the clerk's recommendation to hold 2 advanced paper ballot voting locations and 1 paper ballot location on election day for the 2022 municipal election, and that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the use of an accessibility bus on election day. Discussion on this motion. Go ahead, Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. In reading this report, I find that, and I don't know whether there's some history on how long Ward 3 has not had a voting station. As one thing that I kind of noticed, because the far end where Councillor R.O.L.L lives is a long way out to the extremities. And I thought that there was one at one time in the Rockport area. The other possibility here is that a lot of people vote on voting day. They're really not used to advanced polling, I don't think. The other part of it is the computer. There's still a lot of people who are not computer literate, let alone our broadband service, which we know is a little spotty at the best. And so having good internet service that they can actually communicate with and make connections. And as the last election happened at the polling station that I was at, paper ballots were not available. And I know we've talked that to death also about having enough paper ballots to cover it. 1, for all the people who want to show up, but 2, in case the electronics all fail, because that is indeed possible, or even get hacked. And that's one of my other parts of this that I really dislike. I'm not as much as we use computers and it's part of our daily life, it's still not something that I really am happy about. But the other side of this is that the Elections Act in 1996 also indicates that you're allowed 3 hours off work if it's on election day, voting day only. So any advance poll that somebody might want to come to get off work, they can't get that hour. Those 3 hours don't classify or are not part of that. So there's only voting day that they're allowed to do that. And in this case, we only have Fox Run, which is a 2-hour window for advanced polling, which is mainly for their residents, and then Lansdowne, which the whole township must come to. And if there aren't a lot of people going to the advanced polls, what kind of bottleneck will we create? And will there be one? I don't know that it's ever been done this way before, so I don't know. And we're all in the same boat. How does it work? How will it work? And what problems? Saving money on election day, that's not a biggie for me, because I think we still need to try to get all our residents to a voting station, regardless of what that costs. It's just one of those things that must happen. Certainly there's in the past, there's been office personnel that have been to every one of these voting stations to help us out, through the process. And I don't know why that may not be the way we go this year too. So I do have some difficulty with only having one voting station on the day of our election. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments for the clerk? Go ahead, Councillor R.O.L.L.
Keeping in mind then Councillor Maybe's concern, was it considered, and hasn't been presented here, was it considered having one additional on election day location? That would mean, I understand that would be 2 teams, 2 tabulators. So we'd be adding a team, adding a tabulator. And my point further would be, if we did that, then we could use that team in the training spectrum. We could put them on 2 half days also for the advanced poll. So we would have, instead of the one team doing everything, we would add a team, and we could add perhaps 2 locations. Which, does Lyndhurst have an accessible location? And is the Rockport Hall an accessible location? I'm not sure whether I was reading into that we had to be very careful about AOTA, or whether it was just we were tightening up. Thank you.
Madam Clerk?
Thank you. And through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, when we did the review and staff did the review of all the different polling locations, and keeping in mind, it's been a challenge for all senior management to try to deal with the budget constraints of the impacts of COVID-19. So when we reviewed every possibility, perhaps there were elections locations that were accessible, like Rockport Community Hall. I'm actually not entirely sure if it's accessible. I'd have to look into that, because we liked to use our own buildings if we could, except for the fire hall in Gananoque because of the social distancing requirements that are in place now. It wouldn't house many people there. So we opted for the Pentecostal church, which is used for the provincial and federal elections as well. But mainly like I had sent the last report, many municipalities around us are going completely electronic. And of course, recognizing the broadband issues that we have in the township, that's not an option for us this year. So I wanted to have paper ballot locations that really addressed each end of the township, as well as the main location here in Lansdowne. And I wanted that for the reasons outlined in the report, which means, the core elections team could be trained adequately and accurately and more efficient on election day. I think to your point, Councillor, maybe with that additional training, those 2 additional days prior to election day, I think it would be more efficient and there wouldn't be a bottleneck, is my anticipation. But having that said, the main, at the forefront of senior management's mind is the budgetary constraints. And for that reason, I tried to deliver the best solution that addresses both that and the constituents. And that also sort of doesn't really address necessarily the north end on advanced polling location days, except Sealy's Bay. But that's why we opted for an accessibility bus on the actual election day. So the Lyndhurst residents and some of the other residents, outlying residents, Willowbank, if they can't make it to an advanced poll, they have an option to book a bus, whether they need a wheelchair access bus or not. It will service everyone's requirements that can't make it or can't get transportation on their own on election day.
Further questions, comments? Go ahead, Councillor Foti.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Excuse me. When I read this, it's different. So you have to read it a few times to absorb all what's being presented here. And after having done all that, I like what I see here. The simplicity is that if election is held on Monday, you're going to go vote Monday. If it's held on Tuesday, you'll vote Tuesday. The difference here is you're going to vote Monday in Sealy's Bay, Tuesday in Gananoque, and Thursday here at Lansdowne, election day. As Councillor maybe had mentioned about, those people at work can only get off on election day. That's true. But these hours of operation from 12 till 8, it's pretty unusual work shift if somebody is working from noon till 8. They're either working from 8 or 9 in the morning till 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and then so far for an afternoon shift. So, and then they have the advantage or option, I should say, of voting online if they wish. I do like the idea. We saved a lot of money here. And as Madam Clerk has mentioned, it was forefront on their minds. And they still have to deal with the COVID restrictions of getting people in and out with the least interaction as possible. We are likely one of the fewer municipalities who are still looking for a lot of paper ballots. And perhaps this is one way to slowly wean us off someday at some point, if and when we ever have enough strength to have electronic voting in a number of locations throughout the township. I like it. I just plain like it. And then when I was reading it again over earlier this morning on the first coffee, right under the analysis, it says the clerk shall establish the number and location of voting places for an election as he or she considers most convenient for the electors. That's good enough for me. Thank you.
Further comment or question in regards to the motion that's on the floor? Go ahead, Councillor Olkey.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, do we have an idea of how many actual voters we have in the township? I've been crunching a few numbers here, just maybe illustrative.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, approximately 9,500 eligible. Turnout's normally around 41% though.
Okay, well,
No,
technically about 10%
total
of our,
population.
Or sorry,
96.
total population.
I think voters is only
I can
like
double
5,000.
check that number before I give you a solid answer.
I'm not trying to play games here. It's just that 1,031 people, and that includes the 335 that went to the advanced polls, use these polling stations. And I'd be curious to know what percentage of the voters actually use them. And to me, that's an indication of the value.
So just to clarify from Councillor Olkey that 1,031 individuals voted by paper ballot and total ballots.
Or to an electronic voting station, to a polling site.
Okay, so total amount of votes cast in the last election were about, Councillor Fody, you have that number in your head?
Thank you, Your Worship. I always, in any election, use the vote for mayor because it encompasses all three wards. And the last election was approximately 4,200 people voted for mayor, give or take.
A quarter of our voters still made use of these polling stations, whether electronically or by ballot.
Okay,
If that's considered significant and a factor, great, but I didn't see it used in the paperwork.
fair enough. Go ahead.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor. In my last report that I sent to September, the eligible electors were 9,818 and web votes cast were 2,898. Phone votes 601 and total electronic were 3,499. And manual paper ballot is 1,030, but taking into consideration that there were more people at polling locations, but because we were low on ballots, it was actually reflected in the e-participation numbers.
Fair enough. So there was actually more people that wanted to vote by paper that couldn't because we ran out of, which is a fair point. So I'm not going to make, go ahead, Councillor, maybe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I was just going to make that point too, is that I know when I went to the polling station, I had to do electronically because there were no more paper votes or ballots. So I would say it's probably 50-50 on electronic to paper ballots if we really wanted to count it accurately, because those people would have done it. The other side of that is I found the electronic voting slower than writing a paper ballot and taking it up to the machine. So our room, which we were in, was almost packed with about 30 people waiting to use the computer because we didn't have paper ballots. So that's something to consider.
Well, I do know that the clerk had committed to ensuring that that wouldn't be an issue, that we would not be out of paper ballots this year. So I don't think we have to worry about that going forward. But your point in regards to online voting keep in mind that over 4 years, the generation of the voting systems have gotten better and better and better. While that does not negate the issue about broadband here, I still think that as time wears on, there'll be less and less requirement. People will appreciate the simplicity. Having said that, I still know that there are a number of people who distrust the electronic system, that they want a paper ballot. And I don't see us giving up that entirely. Definitely not this election, maybe even not the following election, but that the clerk has put her mind to making this as fair as possible with reducing the overall cost to the township, which is paramount based on the challenges that we're facing going forward and in any budget line items. So I'll leave that. Councillor R.O.L.L.
Just a quick question. Are we restricted in the time frame and number of advanced days that we can utilize? I didn't take time to update myself on the Elections Act there.
No, that is something the clerk can determine. The only thing that's prescribed is the voting hours on voting day, which is 10 to 8, unless I decide to start earlier, which I have for Fox Run. So it's definitely flexible to have an additional advanced poll location and still use the same amount of staff and one tabulator.
The reason I was just thinking of people who like to have a little help. That's illegal. We can still help people even if they came to a center, an advance poll, they could get help in making a vote.
Yeah,
Is that legal?
absolutely. Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor. We normally have a kiosk set up right here at the office for anyone that would require assistance from
Uh-huh.
staff.
Uh-huh.
And that's obviously not paper ballot, that's the
some kind of-
electronic advanced.
Okay.
And then if they need assistance online, we can certainly do that. I just wanted to also add that if ever there were a time to start to transition to e-voting and e-participation, I think on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic,
Mhm.
this is maybe a time where people are
Okay.
more technologically inclined than they've ever been. So keeping that in mind, and then also recognizing the ability and the ease of e-participation and the want for people to cast a paper ballot vote. That's really why I tried to address each area of the township, and where I couldn't because there wasn't an accessible location in the North and Lyndhurst area, we got the accessibility bus for people that would need, transportation for their ease of access as well. Again, and it's listed in the report, if council has any other suggestions, if you can get them to me by November 30th, then I can take that into account when I develop the clerk's procedures.
So this does not preclude, the motion that's on the floor tonight does not preclude adding additional locations for advance polls, which is the question that Councillor R.O.L.L asked.
Yes, I just was thinking in terms of spreading it to the north and, excuse me, particularly for people who are a little shy about electronic voting and perhaps would feel more comfortable, a little help. But I do know that, again, I ask does Lyndhurst have an area that would work? Or
The only one would be the Legion, I would think.
Well, not the.
does the
Legion.
library
It's
qualify?
far too small. Like that's the problem, is the area inside with, and what I tried to do was plan next year as if some of the same public health requirements were in place.
Good point.
And so for that reason, the library was not an option. We did talk about the fire training center again, and it does have an ingress and an egress that you can enter and exit that's separate, but the room alone is still too small for any kind of distancing if that's still in place. So that's the issue with that. And again, to your point, Madam Mayor, is we like to take under consideration our own buildings first. But certainly if you wanted me to take a look at the Legion and see what the accessibility requirements would be for that, I can certainly do that. I know, sorry, one of the standards is that you need parking and you need the lines and you need the accessibility parking and stuff. So I don't think the Legion has that.
Gravel lot.
So
Just one final question then, please. What would be the latest date that we could potentially add or change for the election? I mean,
Right.
it's not a problem getting it out to the public. There's other issues, I guess, and all of this. So what's the latest date that you can actually say, okay, we could incorporate something or
the
make
very
change?
latest date legally would be June 1st, or I believe it's 2nd of
What
2022.
would be a comfort zone?
For me, that's
Yeah.
not my comfort zone. For me,
No,
and that's why
no.
this is coming to you now, would be November 30th. I'm going to start planning the clerk's procedures December, January to be ratified, not ratified, sorry. Council doesn't have to ratify the clerk's procedures, but I still want to send them for information by end of first quarter next year.
To end of March. So she would like to have everything nailed down before the end of March.
Oh,
Well, I
before
would,
that.
I would hope, sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, to have any kind of input from council by the end of this year at the very latest, so that I can start planning. It takes a while to plan all of the aspects of the election.
So can I let the CAO in just to add to her, and then I'll go to Councillor Oki.
One of the other things that we need to plan for is getting our reservation in for equipment for tabulators and so on. So the sooner that we can do that, we've got those secured and we know we have them for whatever we need them, for however many polls and stuff.
Thank you. Councillor Oki?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just mentioned too that those locations mentioned in Lyndhurst aren't necessarily convenient to people in Lyndhurst. You'd still need the accessibility bus.
Fair enough. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to recognize Councillor Fody, but then we need to move on with the agenda. So and people have had a number of times to speak. So I'll let you go, Councillor Fody, and then call the question.
Thank you, Your Worship. Something maybe we haven't touched on here tonight. By these rotating ballot voting days, we have the same staff. So we have the continuity from day to day, or, that's key. We've all seen people brought in for election day it's a learning day. It's a bad day to be a learning day. I know they've all been taught, but it isn't the same as being in gear for election day. And that has led to lineups in itself
Mhm.
and confusion and so much. I like the simplicity of the same staff running every poll each day. They don't have to run back and forth between polls, shuttling ballots around because all polls are open at the same time. I think there's a lot of pluses here. Thank you.
I'm going to recognize Counselor Jameson because he hasn't had a chance to speak, but I am calling the question after Counselor Jameson.
And I just want to say, what concerns me is we don't want to be seen to be in any way trying to manage this process. We can make the suggestions and then we need to move on and put our confidence in the clerk and the staff to get it done. But there's a point where we may start to be seen to be doing things that we're going to regret. There's no nefarious activity going on here, but we don't want to be, we don't want to walk into it. That's
Fair
my
enough.
concern. That's
Okay, with that last comment, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion at hand as it's written, please signify. All those opposed? And we're carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, next motion that's on the floor, Community and Business Services Report, SR 123-21, Strategic Plan Adoption. Motion is put forward by Counselor Jameson, seconded by Counselor Foti, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approves the strategic plan, and that the Committee of the Whole recommends Council direct staff to implement said strategic plan. Discussion on the motion. I think we had a very clear and concise presentation from the consultants. And the plan itself is very impressive to look at and to read as I'm giving my own opinion from the point of view that any average Joe can pick it up, read it, understand where we're headed. And that in itself from a strategic plan is imperative because it shouldn't be a document that's so painful to read that nobody wants to read it or can understand it. So anyways, with that, I'll take questions or comments in regards to the motion that's on the floor. So Councillor R.O.L.L, you had your hand up.
I was just going to ask, it's mentioned this, the 10-year plan was the previous strategic plan, 10 years with a 5-year update, or is that the way they operate?
Madam Community and Business Services. And then I'll recognize Councillor Maybe who's next. You put his hand up.
Certainly. Thank you. And through you, your worship, the previous plan was actually a 4-year plan. I believe last council, I want to say it was a 2015 to 2019 plan.
Okay. Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, looks like a great plan. It presented well. On page 3, there's something that says treats should be, but it should be threats, I imagine. Is the
Oh,
typo on the
Thank you for
actual
the
sheet.
typo catch.
Just page 3. I'm trying to think, where did I see that again? It just kind of, with trick or treat, I was kind of wondering, why are we doing that?
Do you see where it is?
Page 3.
Director? What paragraph?
Just reading it, sorry.
I don't have.
When you want to find it.
Yeah.
And I even read it twice trying to, is that what it said?
I will take a close look for that one. My apologies. We could read this, I'm sure between the team, we've read it
Yeah.
1,500 times, but
Yeah, but I did note that
Okay.
it was on page 3, so.
Page 3 spelling error. Okay.
Yeah.
Any further questions or comments in regards to the plan itself before we adopt it? Go ahead, Councillor Foti.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Like my colleagues, this has been done well. And then the procedure that this organization, this company that we hired to do this, the way that they did this gave us a real true look at what each aspect, whether it's council, whether it's staff, whether it's the public. And for that, it weighs heavy. But that coupled up with our asset management plan gives us a real left-hand, right-hand approach to running council in this township from here forward, regardless of who is at the council table. Thank you.
Fair enough. Any comments or questions? You did find it, Councillor, maybe? Go ahead.
Yes, it's in the paragraph. During the first workshop in early 2021, council worked to identify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and treats facing the township.
There we go.
It's a sweet
Okay.
time.
Threats it is, not treats. Thank you. Yeah, maybe we could go with the treats. Anyways, any other further comments or questions? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and we're carried. Next motion that's on the floor, Community Business Services Report SR 124-21 Remembrance Day Services. The motion comes forward from Councillor Fody and seconded by Councillor Jameson. That the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council receive Community and Business Services Report SR 124-21 for information. Any discussion on that motion? I'll just make note that I will be attending Sealy's Bay service as I believe Councillor Olkey is attending Lyndhurst. Councillor Jameson is out of town that day. And Councillor Maybe is going into Gananoque, and Terry Fody will be going to Lansdowne. You will be in Rockport, Mallorytown, and I usually try to go to Rockport as well because I try to have it. I think Deputy Mayor Lackey, you have been there in the past as well. Because they have it a little bit later, we're able to sort of do double duty, which is kind of nice. So it looks like we have all of the respective areas covered, and we will gladly attend and we will remember them. Just another comment, I was very honored along with Councillor Olkey and Councillor Fody to receive the pinning of the first poppy by Comrade Russell Thompson, who is 102. What a very, very sweet man, and a true community champion for years. And his business still remains a strong, viable part of the Sealy's Bay community. And a very humbling moment as part of my career here as mayor, and I always will treasure that. So thank you to the group from the Legion who ensured that we are making sure that we're honoring those who've come before us. And the need to keep the peace across the world. So any further discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Olkey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, chatting with Mr. Thompson and looking into the biography that was written about him and published, it's frequently misunderstood how much our volunteers in those years really tried, often against the odds, to get into the actual fighting action. He was posted to a job in Vancouver or out in the west coast of British Columbia, fixing equipment. He moved heaven and earth to get overseas. And he did by the end of the war. And he served in what is known as the Mighty Maroon Machine, which, because of their shoulder patch, was the 5th Canadian Armored Division. He was a Royal Canadian Electrical Mechanical Engineer craftsman, and he would have worked very close to the front fixing tanks and armored vehicles that had been shot up. So he knew very well what war meant, and he volunteered to get there. So when you speak of the volunteerism of that generation, it really is spectacular. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. All those in, Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and our counselor across the way here. Thank you for your service, because you also contributed a great deal to our peacekeepers. Thank you and all of our veterans.
Here, here. All those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All opposed? Carried. Thank you. Next motion that comes forward is in regards to SR 125-21 lease agreement with R.O.L.L Aid Center. And the motion is moved by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Fody, that the Committee of the Whole recommend that Council authorize the clerk and the mayor to enter into a lease with R.O.L.L Aid Center. So the rear of Leeds and Lansdowne, I believe that's what it stands for. Just wanted to double check. Discussion on the motion, Councillor Maybe.
And thank you, Madam Mayor. And through you, in looking at this lease, it said former LeBoat location. I would like that taken out and just plain 129 Bay Street, because I manage a site where it has addresses that which don't change, but the names on the buildings over the years, 150 years, have changed many times. So having LeBoat on it, I feel, is not appropriate for a lease agreement. The address would be more formal and will not change. Thank you.
I'll have the CAO speak to that from a contractual point of view.
It's a minor point. We can call it the former harbor office and just leave it at that. Everybody knows what we're talking about anyway. There's an address onto it.
There's still an address on it as well. So go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
Just to be clear, that location is known as the former liquor store location, not LeBeau. Just
if we're gonna split hairs, here we are.
Yeah.
Fair enough, Councillor Olkey.
Thank you, Worship, and through you. Not interested in splitting hairs. I just like to state my strongest support for this motion and recognize the vital and good work this organization does. Thank you.
Fair enough. Any further discussion on the motion? Go ahead, Councillor Grow.
I thank you through your worship. Is it anticipated that any additional space would be required, or perhaps Councillor Jameson would?
The director.
I think the director
Yep.
should speak. I've been at all the meetings, but
Okay.
Kim knows more about this.
Director Goodman, would you like to speak to that?
Certainly, and thank you, Your Worship, through you. We've actually had some preliminary conversations with a number of community partners. So at this point in time, the Legion is prepared to offer some additional overflow storage to remain in the basement. However, preempting any challenges or anything to that effect that might arise, we've actually had conversations as well with our fire department. We do have unoccupied space that's not really suitable for regular public use because of the lack of emergency egress from the basement at the Sealy's Bay Community Hall. However, it might be useful for overflow canned goods, for example, where someone was to go down, access them, and come up in case of if they had a really
Successful
fortuitous
drive.
food drive, for
Yeah.
example.
Fair enough. Follow up?
So therefore, it sounds like we really wouldn't need additional space at that location attached to the trailer for freezers or anything of that nature.
Through Your Worship, at this point, we don't anticipate that that would be a requirement.
Great, thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
It's been in the press, and it's very much appreciated that Farm Credit Corporation is also providing a grant for $20,000 to the organization. And while the organization signed the forms, I'd like to thank Director Goodman for working with the food bank folks to get that application in, which is successful. And what that will allow them to do is to bring in all the more efficient freezers and refrigerators, as well as shelving and so on, and some additional alteration of the building to make it very, very useful and very modern. So I really appreciate her attention to that, and the time it's taken to kind of move this thing forward is much appreciated right across the township. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And it's carried. Next motion, Finance Report SR 126-21, 2022 General Rates and Fees Bylaw. And the motion comes forward from Councillor Maybe, and then seconded by Councillor Fody, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council grant 3 readings of final passage to bylaw number 21-061, being a bylaw to establish general rates and fees for various services provided by the municipality to take effect January 1, 2022. Now, when this report first went out, there were a couple of clerical errors and track changes that weren't noted. For some reason, it didn't come through with the first iteration that was published. So I just wanted to make that note so that the correct amounts were republished. And I believe that council was made aware and given a track change version so that it gives you some indication of where these fees were versus where they are proposed to be tonight. And I know that there are a number of staff members here on site and zooming in if you have any specific questions. So anybody have specific questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Garreau.
I looked at this at length as I do each year. So I have quite a number of questions. Some of them are softball. Number one, do we really need an adult entertainment parlor license? And do we need a billiard license? Is that a legal requirement? Or is it just a hangover from the 17th century?
Go ahead.
Thank you through you. Those are fees that we have not applied, but if we don't have them, we can assess them
Okay.
if something comes in. So it's been there for some time is my
All right.
understanding.
Fair enough. Moving along, because I do have a lot of small questions, really. Did we eliminate the accessory building fee for, is it Committee of Adjustment here or is it?
Minor variance application fee, the accessory structure fee was eliminated,
Okay,
which was $500,
yeah,
which would default a variance on an accessory structure such as a shed or a dock or something to the standard minor variance application fee, which is $800 or proposed to be $850. Sorry.
okay, so it's $850 right across the board then for,
For a minor variance, yes.
okay. And going with my small questions here. I noticed that agricultural buildings are lesser in fees. Are we careful as to what we define as an agricultural building? In other words, if I own a farm and I build a garage and I say I'm going to put my tractor in it and it ends up with my 2 Maseratis, is that a farm building?
Show me the farmer with the Maseratis, but anyways.
No, you never
3
know.
years, but I'm not certain which fee schedule you're looking at. There, are you looking at the building permit fees?
It would be, it's probably section C. Where am I at here, Doctor? Yes, section, Schedule C. I noticed that the value for agricultural buildings, now one could easily assume that was a barn, but are we careful about residential and garages and sheds on said agricultural properties?
This is through your worship. Those fees were approved by council in 2017 based on a price index for construction. So the fees haven't been changed in terms of the square footage.
I realize that. I'm
since that
just
time.
asking, really what I'm asking is
so
what
yes, it's
defines an agricultural building?
It would be a building under the code. It would meet a certain
Oh,
classification under
there
the
is a
building
code
code.
for
Yeah,
that?
under the building code, it would meet a certain classification.
Thank you. And moving on with the small questions here. Oh, penalties. I noticed there that we have, it used to be, are penalties severe enough? There is stuff going on, as we all know, in this township. So we don't seem to really have a means of controlling it. We don't really, I don't think, want to get into massive bylaw enforcers. And yet, when we catch people, I've heard people say, go pay the fine. So do we need to quadruple them? Do we need to bump them up? And I do read, it says to $2,500 above regular fee. Well, that means that there's wiggle room. And who makes the determination? In other words, should 2,500 be 10,000? And
So
I'm serious when I say that because I see stuff going on constantly. And I know those people are going, come catch me and I'll deal with you later.
So through your worship, in last year's fee schedule, we changed the provision to what it is in front of you right now,
Mhm.
because we did run into a few situations where what the previous bylaw said was double the fee.
Yep.
And in some cases, if you're talking about a large
Yeah.
building or a house or something, when you double the fee, it's substantive,
Right.
which is why we did that. Now, I didn't change the building fee schedule at all this year, because to make changes to the building fee schedule, we need to go through a public process. That's something that we want to undertake to do this year in terms of doing a review of other municipalities, fee structures, best practices,
Mhm.
and looking at the enforcement and looking at our value per square footage. So that's something that will be on the work plan for certain in 2022. And we'll be bringing that forward to council and through a public process.
Okay, and that does answer the next question I had regarding building permits, because I know our reserve funds, because of the odd year that we had, the reserve funds are pretty substantial. they've
Not-
gone up substantially in the last couple of years.
We actually had to draw on the reserve fund last year to help cover the cost of operating in the building department. I believe it was $1,400 that we had to take out of the reserve
But
fund to cover the
you-
cost of operation for the year. This year, we will likely be putting money into the reserve fund. However, in looking, and you haven't seen the proposed budget at this point, but there's certain things that we're proposing to do that
Okay.
would make use of some of those reserve funds.
Okay, so therefore, you, as you described in the coming year, you're perhaps a review to see if we're in the ballpark with our funds, fees?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. A few more here. There were a couple of areas there that I really don't have the expertise on, and they were big numbers. Let's see, official plan amendment, 0 fee from 2,500. There was right next to it, there was a similar fee, and I just wondered why we eliminated the fee altogether. I'm sure there's a simple answer. I just didn't understand it.
So I think it's the way that the chart was transcribed. So in the track changes version that I sent out of the planning fee schedule, right now, under the official plan amendment, if someone is applying for an official plan amendment and a zoning amendment at the same time, there was a fee of $2,000, which covers both the official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment. So it was a consolidated fee. And then there was a major fee of $2,500 if it was a consolidated official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. What I've done to propose for 2022 is delete the concurrent fee and make the fee for an official plan amendment $1,500, which would then be charged together with the fee for a zoning bylaw amendment, which is proposed to be $1,500, which would make it $3,000 for an official.
It's a
plan and zoning.
wash. that
Yeah.
sort of thing. Okay, thank you. I thought it was, I just clearly didn't understand it. All right, and one definitionally, and let's see here. How do I ask this question? Marine structures, marine facilities. Somewhere in here, there's a note number 3, and it says,
Which is proposed to be deleted.
yeah, so it's not an accessory structure. Marine facility is not an accessory structure. So where would that then fit in the fee structure?
Under a regular application,
Just
so
like
through your
house.
worship. So a marine facility would previously it had a reduced fee of $450.
Okay.
So it would be the same fee as any other application
Okay.
because it requires the same amount of review.
Okay. And now one that I have brought up in previous years, and this one would be involve, I think, community business services. And it is specifically the fee structure for Sealy's Bay Dock. Now, if you'll allow me to ramble here a bit, those fees are broken into 3 categories. You will see it's there, and that makes them unfair. If you do some simple math, here's an example. Most marinas go 2 ways. They go on a per foot basis for the year, or they rent you a slip that's appropriate to your boat or whatever for a fixed fee. These schedules are terrible, and they've been like this for a long time because no one wanted to really address it. A couple of years ago, I brought this up, but now I really will be pushing for a change. Here's an example. If you took a person with a 12-foot boat, because in the same fee structure, it's 12 to 8, I'll call it 18 feet at 17.9. If you do the math on that, the one guy's paying $48.75 a foot, and the other person's paying $32 a foot. See, there's nothing fair. If you move up to the next structure of 18 feet to 28 feet, those people, the smaller boat is paying $40 a foot. The bigger boat's paying $25 a foot. I currently pay over $52 a foot, and that's going up this year on the St. Lawrence River. And that's fair on the St. Lawrence River. So these fee structures are not good. What I would, just off the top of my head, when I did a little math here, we need a flat rate. I would strongly suggest a flat rate per foot. That makes it fair for the 12-footer or the 40-footer or the 25-footer. and a lot of boats fit into the 20 to 25 range. So there's going to be a couple of winners and there's going to be a couple of losers, but it would make it simpler to, I think, administer, but that's a small point. It would simply make it fairer to everybody concerned, and people might, but it is fair, a straight up fee with hydro, without hydro. And I just wrote down some numbers, and I think a good flat rate to start would be $45 a foot for the season. I'm just talking seasonally here. I don't eliminate the 1 month rental, unnecessary. You're either in for the season or you're not. And you could do the 155 or something, roughly speaking, for an overnight, because a 20-foot boat, for instance, at 155 is $30 a night. Quite reasonable. I think that's what the lock people charge, something of that nature. I'm not 100% sure, but we could align it with that. With hydro, you might want to go $50 a foot or something. And then at any rate, that fee structure is terrible. It's unfair. And I think the simple solution is a straight up per foot, per season, with or without hydro, and a daily rate there. Thank you. Oh, and ramp fee of $5. Thank you.
Director Goodman, did you want to speak to that?
No, thank you, Your Worship, and through you, only to say I appreciate the feedback. We did do a really inclusive look along the entire Rideau Canal about 3 or 4 years ago. I would be happy to go back and reevaluate against similar body of water and so on and so forth with service
I
levels.
just want to point out that there's an old saying on the river. It says, every boat needs a home, and there's a lack of space. There will only continue to be a lack of space. It's getting tougher and tougher. There are waiting lists everywhere. So let's not be naive. Let's get at it. We've been giving people, some folks have been getting a gift. And we should look seriously at that and align ourselves. We don't have to align with anybody up there. We're free to set our own rates. And if it fills up, it fills up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What I might do though, Councillor Jameson, I'll hear from you in a second.
Yep.
Actually, I'm going to recognize Councillor Jameson to hear what you have to say in regards to where you stand on this suggestion
Well-
from Councillor R.O.L.L. The reason being is that if this changes anybody's mind or adds anything to it, it might, because there needs to be an amendment to this motion. Okay. So I'm going to,
I want to speak in support of what Councilor Guerrero is saying. You mentioned it to me the other day. I went home and looked at it, and I do believe it's overly complicated, and it is kind of weird the way the numbers shake out. So it, I agree with them. Let's make the rich pay.
easy.
I think that's what he said. Maybe
No.
he didn't. No. But I agree with him that it would make it simpler. And he said administratively, it's, would make it simpler as a small point, but I think it's actually a fairly big point when you only have a limited number of people that can deal with the harbor once a day and so on and so forth. So I was working up to the idea that maybe we could defer the section. I don't know. I mean, that's the clerk's responsibility to advise, but
So the clerk has something to add, and then we'll entertain the deferral or the amendment to the motion.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. We actually received an application for a fence viewing, which to my knowledge, in the past 12 years I've been here, happened 1 or 2 other times. And for that reason, our bylaw is sorely out of date. I would say 2001, I believe it is. And so we're having a hard time finding fence viewers to do the viewing because a lot of people have either moved out of the township, are deceased, or they're just no longer interested in it. And so I'm going to be bringing a report, all-encompassing report next week with all the information and the specifics. But in an interest of the Director of Finance wanting to condense everything into this bylaw, I thought we could add this additionally as well.
So would it be plausible from a technical point of term to defer this till next week?
I would recommend yes, but I don't know if the Director of Finance wants to weigh in on this or.
Because if it's
Yes.
deferred, it gives us a chance to fix it. And based on the conversations that we've had, I think it's pretty clear as to what direction council, I think that what you're asking is fair. And I think that I saw the director making copious notes while you were speaking. So I think it can be easily changed prior to being ratified. So I will recognize Director of Finance. If Director, is there anything you want to add to that? Or is there something sort of a sense of urgency? We need to make a decision tonight, or can we pull it off, defer it until next week and then have the corrected version come forward to council?
Through you, Your Worship, I would totally support pulling it or deferring it so that we can get all the right information included in the bylaw and have it all in one place for the public to be able to find the rates. And if we can simplify it, that's even better. So I certainly support that.
Okay, so based on the conversation here, I'll take a motion to defer. I have Councillor Jameson and Councillor R.O.L. to second a motion to
Oh, yes.
defer this.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so
All of it or?
all of it,
Yes.
because then it can be corrected.
Yep.
And Jameson
you.
and then Councillor R.O.L., a motion to defer this until the November 8th meeting. Okay. Mhm. Well, because the other thing, sorry, and I've got the agreement there. The reason that the deferral gives us the power, because it basically, it has to come back to the table and we double check it. And if there's anything to change, even then, we make the amendment then. If there isn't, if it doesn't quite fit. But I think that we gave the staff sufficient information here this evening to make the corrected changes. So unless there's anything else, Councillor, maybe do you want to speak to the deferral? Okay, I'll allow it. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The only thing I really wanted to say is in there, it said we're trying to make it like neighboring communities, which is fine. But has there been a cost analysis done on any portions of this to actually verify whether we are under or over charging?
Madam Planner or it should be the Director of Finance. I'm not sure, because the majority of the fees are with the planning department. That's why I picked on you. There's a motion to defer, but I'll allow the information to come forward. Go ahead, Madam Planner.
Thank you, through you. I can tell you that a number of municipalities, larger municipalities, have done a review of services to identify what it actually costs to process a planning application. Our fees are quite low in comparison to what it actually costs to process a planning application. I mentioned earlier that we are going to do a review of the building fees this year. We're also going to include a comparative review of the planning fees and looking at that as well, and the costs associated with processing the application. So that'll come forward later this year. But at this point, I didn't want to make some significant substantive changes without a basis of comparison.
Follow up, Councillor, or
Yes.
Councillor, maybe.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I guess the bottom line, we aren't going in the red with the fees we're charging presently by what I've seen in the past. So are we going to increase them just to increase them? Or are we, do we have a purpose for increasing them?
Through you, Madam Chair, just to provide an example, a committee of adjustment application is $800 for a minor variance. Each member of the committee of adjustment receives $25 per application right now to review that. So that is, I'm doing math in my head, $150 off the top of an application processing fee. That doesn't take into account any of the time that staff take in terms of reviewing it, circulating it, working with the other agencies. So we're not increasing fees just to increase them, but the planning department operates different than the building department. The building department, under their legislation, is self-funded and runs itself and doesn't fund off the tax base. When you look at the budget actuals, the planning department, notwithstanding the fees we receive, we're not making money in terms of processing the planning application. So there is a portion of the tax base that's offsetting the cost of planning. So we need to look at what the balance is in terms of what that is. I don't know the answers off the top of my head right now, and that's why we need to do that review, look at other municipalities. You don't want to price yourself out of the range to disincentivize development, but you also certainly want to make sure that your rates and costs are fair. And so there's a couple of different ways to look at that through a split structure to your fee schedule. So the larger developments, so for example, a large site plan for condominiums or something right now would be paying the exact same fee as somebody that's building a dock on the waterfront. So we've got to look at the structure of our fees and how those are divided and assigned.
Okay, the deferrals on the floor. Sorry, I didn't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, because at the end of the day, I'll allow it, Councillor Olkey, and then we'll vote on the deferral.
Okay, this is one because I get beaten up every time I go to Lyndhurst about it. There are boats permanently parked at the Furnace Falls dock. There are docks in the water on the shores of Lower Beverly Lake, which I guess were never permitted. Someone mumbled something about someone shook hands once 30 years ago, and those docks have been there ever since. I noticed the Sealy's Bay thing here, and it's being addressed, and there's a deferral on the floor. But I want to put a shout in for my constituents over there who regularly greet me with 2x4s and over these issues on dockage in Lyndhurst Village. And I think it is, but dockage is not a different issue.
Well, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. There
That is a rabbit
difference
hole,
that-
but it could be addressed in this at some point. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Olkey. Okay, so I'm going to call the question on the deferral. All those in favor of deferring the motion until the November 8th council meeting? All those opposed? And we're carried. So this motion will come back with the corrected information as per the discussion this evening, and we will ratify the fees and bylaws then. Next is, go ahead.
A question that arising from the discussion, however, it's outside of the fees bylaw, if I might ask this question. It was mentioned, and I did see in last week's report that fence viewing. Now, I understand that there is, am I right in saying that's the line viewing act?
Through you, Madam Mayor, Line Fences Act. Yep.
Line Fences Act?
Yep.
Do we have a bylaw that supports we can use that?
Back to 2001, and that's why this is required to be updated for a number of reasons, which will be outlined in my report. But basically, right now, some of the provisions are that we can't actually hold a fence viewing between the dates of November 1st and March 30th of the preceding year. And that, you know, has obviously changed over the years. That's 20 years old, whatever it is. No, 19 years. So I will be bringing an updated bylaw to appoint potential fence viewing or fence viewers for this fence viewing next year. And I plan to do an all-encompassing with the Director of Planning and Development review of pound keepers, line fences, and livestock valuers in 2024 with the new incoming council. But all of that information and more will be in my report next week.
It's very specific. Thank you very much. So we do have a bylaw. It's just outdated. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. And this is what we're doing. And as we're moving forward and finding things that have not been revisited, that's what the senior management is actually doing. So we appreciate their efforts and their attention to these details that are maybe not important today, but could be very important tomorrow, depending on if someone has a fence viewing issue, especially if a number of them are passed away or what have you. So anyhow, next on the list is the finance reports SR-127-21, 2021 casino funding. And the motion comes forward from Councillor Maybe, seconded by Councillor Foti, that the committee of the whole recommends that council approve the transfer of $50,000 to community grants reserve fund to fund an intake of community grant applications in the first quarter of 2022. And that the committee of the whole recommends that council approve a one-time contravention of the community grants policy to permit the annual allocation of funds to be split 50-50, or supposed to be, sorry, to be split 50% for intake 1 and 50% for intake 2. And that the committee of the whole recommends that council approve the transfer of $167,274 to the Buildings and Facilities Reserve Fund. Sorry, 74. Oh my goodness. $160,274. My apologies. I don't know where that came from. So I made more money than I gave us credit for. So discussion on this motion, based on this is because In the past, we have not, in the past year, we have not funded any community grants. We cut them out in 2020 as well due to the pandemic. So it was brought forward by staff to ensure that possibly some of these funds come forward in a community grant capacity, which is why the motion is before you. So discussion, Councillor Maybe, and then Councillor Foti.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, I think it's a very good thing to do with the $50,000 to get the community grants going again, since a lot of these organizations are going to be back up and running come next year. So it might be very appropriate for them, as well as the additional money to go into the buildings, as stated by the report, that through the asset management, we might need a few more repairs here and there. So it could be very apropos. The other thing about the casino money, and I know in the past it's been divvied up in different ways, but I certainly see it any future to be dumped into the reserve fund, since our asset management is going to require a lot of funds in there over the time. So it would be nice to do. Thank you.
Comments, questions? Sorry, Councillor Foti, yes.
It's okay. Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I agree with Councillor Maybe. It's nice to see this increased, but we need to put it in perspective. When we were, shortly after we were elected, we bumped this amount up to 125. And then we clawed it way back last year, which we had to do. We had to be prudent, and it worked. But we still have to be prudent, but I do support the fact that we're bumping it back up to 100,000. And these community grant groups that, organizations that will receive this, I'm sure they'll be glad to receive it. We have to breathe some life back into our communities. And these organizations do a good job of doing that. And I'm sure they're glad to get back at it. And this financial help will go a long way toward that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
I agree with my colleagues. I asked a few questions around, and I know that while activity has been definitely curtailed, the costs are going up. Some of the groups are seeing pretty dramatic increases in the insurance costs. And we have put some money on the table in the past, which is designated as administration. And I hope when we move through the process of allowing these grants, that one, we allow the analysis matrix to stand as it should, rather than us picking winners and losers. It's not a good thing. But two, to consider that insurance as well as website costs and so on and so forth have to be in place in order for them to function, because the insurance is such that they won't be able to do anything if they can't pay for the insurance. And the third thing I want to leave on the table as we look ahead is that when it comes to succession, the volunteer challenge is huge. We're an aging population, and it's getting harder and harder. And we had this discussion before, but it would be very valuable if we somehow through community services undertook a program to develop some succession planning that we could apply as a template with various of the organizations in the community. And the reason I'm raising it here again is because it's been raised with me several times, that this is the great challenge, is where do we get the people to move the community forward, right? They're not at all as young and spry as I am.
Fair enough. So the only thing that I would say in regards to the comment made by Councillor Jameson regarding the picking and choosing of the successful applicants, based on the way this is written, the only thing changing to the policy is a one-time contravention to the community grants policy to permit the annual allocations of funds to be spent 50% for intake 1 and 50% for intake 2. So the policy would stand otherwise. So we would not be making the decision around this council table. We would be receiving a report from senior management to allocate it as the applications deemed worthy through the very stringent process. So Councillor Grow.
Thank you. And through you, Your Worship, at the present time, there is a reserve fund for community grants. I thought it was in the neighborhood of $75,000 odd or 74 and change. Number one, is that correct? Number two, is this 50,000 or 2 times 50,000 going into that fund? It's unclear to me. It's 50?
Okay.
And
I'll
if
ask
we
the
have
director.
75,000 in a reserve fund currently, then it's not necessary to transfer anything at this time we already have it covered. And I'm quite certain there is $5,000 in the reserve fund. Thank you.
Director Tyndall?
Through your worship, I believe you're correct, Councillor R.O.L.L, that there's about 75,000 in the reserve fund. Historically, as far as I'm aware, we typically budget the transfer in and then the community grant allocations coming out to net to zero. But because of COVID in 2020, as you may recall, there were a number of initiatives that were proposed, and I think we ended up basically not allocating some of that grant money because some of those community groups couldn't actually do what they had planned to do because of COVID restrictions and closures. So there is some money in the reserve fund because we haven't spent it all. When we budget it, we put it in the reserve fund, and if we don't need to allocate it out, it sits in the reserve fund. The 2022 proposed budget does include $50,000 for community grants. And if council wishes, we can certainly adjust the allocation to the reserve fund if we want to draw that down. Instead of going in and out the same amount, we could not put this $50,000 in if council wishes and just draw down the balance that's sitting there.
So the only other question that the counselor had, Director Tyndall, was in regards to the way this motion is written. Is this two $50,000 grants allocations, or is this 50,000 being split twice? So 25 and 25. Can you clarify that?
Sorry, I apologize. Yes, through your worship. So this is 50,000 for intake 1, basically, and 50,000 would come out of the 2022 budget that we've already put together. There's already 50,000 in there that would become intake 2, assuming council approved that second 50,000 in the 2022 budget.
So 50,000 would be coming from the transfer from the reserve fund that Councillor R.O.L.L just noted. And then another additional 50,000 from this year's funds that we got from OLG.
Correct. 50 is basically casino money from this year that we didn't expect to receive, and 50 is in next year's budget.
Got it. Clear as mud or muddy?
So we haven't touched the $75,000 that's sitting there. I'm sorry, I feel dense right now, but I appreciate, and also with respect to Councillor Fode's point, we did bump this to 125, and if ever there was a time to give the communities a positive break, this is the year. And I know there are challenges, but it strikes me we should be somewhat on the generous side, having given nothing last year. Thank you.
So 50,000 coming from the reserve and 50,000 coming from this extra money that that wasn't anticipated as far as revenue. So it would be a total of 100,000 in 2022 based on this motion, correct, Director Tyndall?
That's correct.
Okay, so it'd be $100,000 in community grants for 2022. 50,000 would come out of the reserve fund that Councillor R.O.L.L pointed out, and 50,000 is coming from the additional funds that were the extra funds that we didn't budget for this year. So they're just wanting to make sure that the funds that we just got that were over and above the budgeted 100,000, part of it is being allocated for next year's grants, and the rest of it is going into the building and facilities reserve fund. There's a lot there. I apologize if I'm making it muddier. Councillor Fode.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I like Councillor R.O.L.'s line of thought. There's 75,000 in that reserve fund now for community grants, true?
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking 50,000. We're back up to our 125. Let's just do it. That's the simplest way that's what I'm hearing.
Okay, how do I?
I'm sure the community grants, as Councillor R.O.L.L just said, would be thrilled to have another 25,000. We're talking about 100. If we're ever going to put it back up, it won't be any simpler than right now. We already held it back last year. Some places, as mentioned, couldn't use it. We're already there. It's just a case of shuffling the shells.
Okay, so Director Tyndall, I'll ask you to unmute your mic so we can talk this through, because I think I need to change this motion if that is the will of council. So basically based on the discussion, they're looking to go back up to the 125,000 that was originally allocated in the last budget for community grants in 2020 that we didn't end up spending, and then we didn't allocate anything in 2021. So the wish would be, provided that the council passes it, is that we would use all of the reserve funds that are currently in community grants reserve fund, plus the additional 50,000. Does that equate to 125, Director Tyndall?
Through your worship, just double checking the latest reserve fund numbers I have
She
here.
wants to make sure.
Yeah, so I'm not telling you something in error.
That's actually not bad.
Another note, just, the other thing is, I guess, is council is going to be receiving the 2022 budget on November 18th. And so if I give you the reserve fund balance right now, which I totally can, it's just when it comes to what we actually put in the 2022 budget, it would probably be better to do it during that meeting under those recommendations maybe. And if council wishes to use what's sitting in the reserve fund, tonight, you could just tell me where you want that other 50,000 to go. You know what I'm
So
saying?
rather than make it more muddy, I actually think Councilor R.O.L. had a good point. Maybe we'll defer this to the November 18th budget meeting. Does that,
Okay.
and then that way we're talking about budget funds anyways. And what it does is it takes the, we know that the casino funds can't be spent for ill-gotten gains or anything other than capital projects. So if we defer this to the November 18th budget meeting, would that be sufficient to hash this out on a more of a line by line? Would that be sufficient, Director Tyndall?
Yes, definitely. And I apologize for the confusion. I was not trying to confuse matters at all. Sorry.
No problem. Not to kick the can down the road, but we're kicking the can down the road. And but I think we'll end up at the same arrival. So the deferral is to defer this motion till November 18th. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Olkey and then Councillor Maybe. And so the deferral is to defer said motion to November 18th, 2021. All those in favor of the deferral, please signify. All those opposed, and the motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Director Tyndall. So next on the docket, is everybody okay to continue to power through the budget or not the budget on the brain on the agenda? Because I think we can potentially, I shouldn't jinx it. I think we can keep going and safely get out of here at a reasonable hour if everybody's okay with it, unless anybody needs a break. Next motion is moved by Councillor R.O.L., seconded by Councillor Olkey, that the committee of the whole recommends that council receive staff report SR 12821 regarding phase 2 of the River Valley Estates subdivision for information. Any comments, questions, queries in regards to the motion that's at hand? Go ahead, Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Worshipman, through you. I was just hoping that, is there another map available to actually show us what because it's actually for the new road, it's talked about that, but the map that's actually indicated in our package doesn't quite have all the details that I thought. I know where the road's going to go, but because I've been up there enough and seen it. But is there another map that can be presented to kind of show where we're really looking at? Because the connection point at the bottom of the on the main road is not indicated on that particular street, which I believe does connect.
Madam Planner.
Your worship, the road extension is shown on the one schedule to the report. It's the draft M plan. I'm just trying to open it up right now. And I can share my screen. It doesn't show the whole road because it's only the section that's within this plan.
So it's just that one little portion there.
So it's just this little, oh, sorry, it's just coming up. It's just the stub that's the new road at this time. Future subdivision approvals will bring that road through and it loops around south of Hay2 Road.
Yeah.
So what's within this phase of this subdivision is just this extension of Hay2 Road. And then this new road, which is, I believe it's Beaudry Street is the name that's been approved for it.
So I guess my follow-up is every time they want to add to this road, they have to come back to us and have us approve this, or are
That's
we?
correct, because each phase of the subdivision needs a complete engineering design and needs to be reviewed and will require a new subdivision agreement. So at this point, this phase of the subdivision is registering the 6 lots that are shown on this plan. And then subsequent phases will require final subdivision approval and a new registered plan to actually create the lots, because this is the process that actually creates the lots and the roads.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further comments, questions? Go ahead, Councillor Foti. Sorry, I thought your hand went up.
No.
Nope, never mind. My bad. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and it's carried. Next motion is moved by Councillor Olkey, seconded by Councillor R.O.L.L, that Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve a bylaw to stop up, close, and convey at fair market value a portion of the unopened road allowance between Broken Front Lot 12 and Concession 1 Lot 12, and that the applicant provide a reference plan of the lands to be conveyed prepared by a qualified surveyor at their expense, and that the applicant provide the township with a land appraisal for the property to determine the value of land, and that the land value is established in the appraisal, and any other costs incurred by the township to complete the land transaction are to be borne or paid for by the applicant. We have the Director of Operations on the line. At this point, there was some questions in the public meeting I just would like to have clarified before we have any further discussion or I call the question. Director, are you available for a question there? There he is. So the question was in regarding to the neighboring property where the need for a testing well was required. The Director of Planning indicated that you had no concerns with this application coming forward because one didn't really affect the other. I just would like to hear from you that that us stopping up this road allowance does not create any undue hardship for you to get the testing well that you're looking for on the neighboring property that they're severing off.
That is correct. The area where we need to have the testing well is directly behind our waste disposal site. And it's not anywhere near the road allowance that we're talking about.
So that it was a negotiation that's going to need to happen with the new owners of said property, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So does that answer? Okay. Perfect. I'm glad that I asked the question. Any further comments, questions, or queries in regards to this? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and we're carried. Thank you. Next motion is moved by Councillor Olkey, seconded by Councillor R.O.L.L, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the proposed alterations to the property at 1084 Princess Street. I'm having trouble with numbers this morning. In accordance, this morning, apparently I need a nap. Oh, man. In accordance with the details described in the application presented to the Municipal Heritage Committee at their meeting on October 15th, 2021. Sorry, this is 1084 Prince Street. That's here in the village of Lansdowne. Any comments or question in regards to the report that's presented to us this evening? Go ahead, Councillor Foti.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. When I read this, the first thing that struck me, are we qualified to weigh in on this? Or is that not something that should be done by a Heritage Committee? I don't feel qualified to weigh in on any movements to a heritage property or building myself.
Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, through you. The application was at the Heritage Committee. Heritage Committee reviewed the submission under the Ontario Heritage Act with an alteration to a designated property. The Heritage Committee is required to make a recommendation to Council, who is the approval authority. So the Heritage Committee was satisfied with the submission and recommended approval, which is now in front of Council.
Go ahead.
Just one follow-up, if I might, Madam Mayor. I found it oddly strange that there wasn't any finances of any kind attached to this application.
Meaning they're not requiring anything from us as a municipality?
Yeah, I thought most heritage builds, there's usually a financial ask involved, and is that perhaps coming later, or?
We have Councillor Olkey who sits on that committee, so
Okay.
I'll recognize him.
The issue with this particular building was initially the ask included some light fixtures. It was pointed out that while electricity existed when the building was made, electrification did not. So therefore, the approval was just to get the right to put an electrical light there to illuminate the front of the building, which would not have existed when the building was made.
Right.
Therefore, with this one, when they're talking about lighting, there's no ask for money.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
If I could just
Director.
add to that through you, with the door that's being changed on this one, it would have been eligible for an application for a heritage celebration grant up to $2,500. The owner of this property did recently receive approval for a grant, so didn't apply for further funding at this time.
Good ask. Any further comments or questions in regards to the motion that's at hand? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? That's carried. Okay, unfinished business. Does anybody have any unfinished business? Go ahead, Counselor Maybe.
Just to bring it up again, the 401 light is unfinished business. There is a lawsuit actually happening on somebody who had an accident there. That's somebody who was injured quite seriously. More than a couple of years ago at this point, I believe, with the Offspring boy. It was a motorcycle. A car came off the highway and took him out. So he's still recovering from that particular thing. And his mother reiterated that there is a lawsuit happening to that. It was a vehicle from the States who came up the rampway and did not stop. So I know that we've had many incidents here. And as the last report that I had seen from the clerk, the OPP have recommended it goes in. It's MTO that's dragging their feet. So if there's any more latitude or other avenues, I just put it out there. Thank you.
I'll just bookend that by saying I reached out to a director at MTO today about another matter, and I will ask the same question again in regards to another question that was asked, and we received a very benign response. So I've moved it up the chain again. Any further unfinished business? Unfinished business? Seeing none, any other business? Go ahead, Counselor Olkey, then Counselor Guerrero.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I'm just looking for information. I received an email asking me questions about what was going on in Rideau Lakes, specifically with an announcement of provincial funding to enhance their interconnectivity. It was for a certain sum of money, and my response was essentially that it was a surprise announcement to us, but it wasn't made to us. It's to another township and another council. But if anyone has any insight and what program this was, I'd appreciate hearing it.
Go ahead, CIO.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I think the inquiry stems from a report in local media last week that Rideau Lakes had received approximately $550,000 to be shared between the province, Rideau Lakes, and WTC Communications. This was part of an ICON funding program. My understanding is that the program with WTC in the township of Rideau Lakes started in 2019. They had submitted a ICON application, which was in the works before the ground rules changed. And so I think this was a bit of a legacy approval under ICON. As council is well aware, we've been with the change in the funding model, we couldn't apply for funding now for broadband under the ICON program. So I think this is some cleanup. I would imagine that there'll be a few more of these announcements coming for some legacy ICON projects that have been in the works beforehand. And one thing I wanted to point out on the ICON thing with respect to the township's broadband project is the ICON program was aware that we were in the process of preparing an application for intake 2. They acknowledged that they knew we were doing this. And when the funding changed, we were just out of luck. So as we all recall.
Thank you, CAO. Any other, oh, sorry, Counselor Guerrero, unless you had other things, Counselor Olkey, or was that it? Counselor Olkey, that's fine. Okay. Counselor Guerrero, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Gypsy moth this year seemed to affect a number of areas more than others. And several have read that cities like, I believe, London and perhaps Chatham, they did have helicopter service doing some spraying. One of my local constituents did a little homework, and that helicopter company could perhaps, and I've seen this model work years ago in my previous life, and I know the company, they know what they're doing. But anyway, if there was enough volume or interest, and it should be adjacent properties to make it work, but they may be willing to come to this township or parts of it or whatever. So just in a way, I think I'd like to see the township do a wee bit of homework on that and maybe publish that. And it's, I could give you the contacts on that. It's Zimmer Helicopter, and then they have a little spin-off that does the bookings or something. And there would be no promises they're coming. Obviously, they're looking for some economy of scale in this thing. It's just that a couple of people have come to me about gypsy moth spraying and is it possible? And the MNRF, I don't think has any interest in doing it, et cetera. Thank you.
Director, or sorry, CEO Donaghy.
Thank you, Worship, and through you. We have to be careful about preferencing a particular business and it's being seen to endorse somebody. So I'm very cautious on any way, shape, or form that the township somehow endorses a particular business, because if you endorse one, you have to endorse all. So it's a big thing. I know councillors in the past have put out information on their websites or on their Facebook pages about services that are available and such like that. I just think from a township perspective, we have to be very careful about what we put out there, particularly something that can be as controversial as spraying essentially what some people may see as poison from the sky all over the township. So I think there's a lot of thought that has to be gone into that before we go in.
So I think the request from Councillor R.O.L.L was to ask that maybe the Director of Operations provide some additional information about the pros and cons of possibly spraying, and not necessarily endorsing one business over another, but that, you know, if you're feeling that you need to have it, or are you looking for us as a township to provide this service? Because that's a different ask.
No.
Okay, I
The
just want to be
service
clear
would
about that.
be excuse me, if I may.
Yep, no, go ahead.
In my mind, the service would always have been user pay 100%. It was just putting out the idea of the concept, even because most people are not aware of that type of concept. They might have read something, as they said, London did some spraying in parks and so on. But if it is inappropriate for a township to talk about these things, that's fine by me. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
Yeah, I just, Your Worship, while my wife was out harvesting one at a time, I watched the webinars, and there was a really interesting one that was run by the Woodlot Group. And part of the challenge in terms of putting people together, groups together, even municipalities together, was the dog fight that came up to the points the CAOs raising, neighbors against neighbors and so on and so forth. So I think I'm encouraging, of course, I'm encouraging Jill to go out and harvest them one by one next summer. But I think we'd be in a tough spot if we started to promote this in terms of the reaction to the poison from the sky is exactly how it was put.
Fair.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
We'll withdraw the poison from the sky.
Councillor maybe, and then Councillor Foti.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My last discussion with the director of the MNRF in Kingston, who knows very well about this, they have no interest in doing any spraying as they did in the 70s and 80s, just for this plain fact of the poison in the sky kind of scenario. And so they aren't going to be doing anything in the future.
Go ahead, Councillor Foti.
Thank you, Your Worship. While we're on the subject, I personally looked into the spray for our own property. It is available. It's not prohibitively expensive, but I think anybody that's looking to deal with these little critters rather than collect them, you can actually spray your own property. I think it would be incumbent upon you to let your neighbors know you're going to do so in case somebody had some serious health issues. But the chemical spray is available. What I'm still looking for myself, and I really haven't spent much time in the last couple of months doing so, with today's expertise in drones and development of drones, I think it'd be very simple for a company, and maybe some of our arborist companies out there should pick up on this and get a drone with spray applications. They are out there. Agricultural knows all about them, and perhaps, advertise long before these little critters come back that you have this service available. Thank you.
Councillor Oki.
Thank you, Your Worship. And at the risk of being somewhat humorous, whilst planting trees at Sweets Corner School, there are many people that are very interested in trees, knowing much more than I did and much more about birds. Apparently, there are two types of birds that will eat these critters. One is the scarlet tanager, and the other is the cuckoo. There are two types of cuckoos in this township, and I think we should encourage more cuckoos. I'm sorry, but there's a yellow-billed one and a black-legged one, and you don't see them very much, but they are two of the only types of birds who will eat these things, and we should really encourage more cuckoos. With that, I yield the floor. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'll move on to any other business. Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, just to remind everybody, the Lansdowne Christmas Parade, Santa Parade, November 21st, and Gananoque's on December 4th, and everything's going ahead with the Gan one. Haven't quite got the information on the Lansdowne one yet, but all good.
Fair enough. Okay, any further other business? Seeing none, I'll call for notices of motion. Any notice of motion? Notice of motion? Seeing none, I'll go forward with the mayor's update. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Last night was Halloween, and I do believe that there's certainly a significant number of homes that aren't handing out candy as they once were, and that's probably indicative of the remainders of the pandemic. Which is fine. But I will say that my youngest was out, and there was lots of fun ingenuity at hand, people who have slides to hand out candy so they're not close by, but yet dressed up and really went out over the top for decoration. So it was nice to see the kids out and enjoying it. And luckily on a really nice, reasonable weather night, unlike a couple of years ago when we had to deal with a stormwater backup here in the village and a really awful night for the children. So it's glad to have that. Just to underscore again that this council prudently agreed to only budget for $100,000 in revenue from the casino, additional funds that we received from them on top of their taxation. And we're happy to report that we are in excess of, I think it's 210,000 over what we had budgeted in total. What's nice about this is that we're becoming less dependent on these funds and more in line with what we require from our own taxpayer. And I know this might seem counterintuitive to some individuals, but the pandemic, if nothing else, and as the budget document comes through, it's clearly laid out, you'll see that we need to make sure that we are very prudent with these funds because they don't have to give them to us. And that was shown through the pandemic when they were closed down, but that it will help pad the coffers to help bridge the gap between our infrastructure deficit and what we have in reserve funds. So the hope is that it will help, but we won't be caught in the future expecting those funds or as much of those funds in the future. Remembrance Day, obviously that report came forward, and I'm very proud of the council members who are committed to attending those ceremonies, and we appreciate that. I wanted to underscore one of the first gatherings that I've got to go to after all of the pandemic stuff was a Sabara AGM in Sealy's Bay, and it was very exciting to attend because they've got a really great idea, and I don't know if I'm allowed to publicly announce this or not. Maybe I should. The performance that I witnessed with what they're hoping to do. Okay, I'm okay to, okay. Okay, so lamplighter Lottie made an appearance, and Lottie was the local lamplighter who was a sort of a a lady that everybody knew that came and lit all the lamps and snuffed them out every morning and night. But lamplighter Lottie the lamplighter, will be giving tours virtually through Sealy's Bay for those who would like to come and hear the stories and the anecdotes of the homes and the people who once lived there. I must say thank you to our community and business services and Driftscape app, which is partially through the RED grant, I believe, that's provided this opportunity to digitally share these funny stories of our people. There's one story about some individuals having creme de menthe at a church social, which then left them somewhat incapacitated when they left, and some other fun stories, and of the sawmill and Sir John A. visiting the National Hotel. What was the National Hotel? Which seems kind of funny in Sealy's Bay, let's be honest. So the National Hotel in Sealy's Bay. So they had about 25 stops along this tour. It's all going to be narrated by locals, and to me, it's a really great indicator of what we can do as community groups. And I must give kudos to Sabara for taking something on to, again, showcase their area and to keep people there and to keep them walking around and engaging with not only the history, but the people that remain there today. So congratulations to your group. And I'm very excited to see what the actual tour comes out so that I can take a wander. We also, the majority of council attended the Springfield House, the Friends of Springfield House meeting on Saturday at the community building at 2:00 to listen to the group of individuals who are passionate about creating a space at Springfield House for archival pieces, as well as preserving the historical buildings there. So it's very timely, as we will be receiving the building condition assessments, the BCAs, as of next week. Director Holiday Wood is going to provide us with all the BCAs at that time, which will hopefully inform us as we go into our budgeting process for 2022, as well as informing the asset management plan. So it was good to see a number of people out, not only that, as well as Minister Clark was in attendance to listen to the group of individuals. So dependent on the recommendations from the senior management team, we will use that information to move forward as council agrees, and we'll go from there. Other than that, the last thing that's probably just as important, I know that the county has passed a resolution, or at least the direction was given to staff at the county level in regards to Indigenous research about the counties, and a statement to be made prior to any county meeting. So I was wondering if I could get the support from council to ask our clerk to ask for them to include us in said research. They have to research the whole county as it is. It makes it somewhat redundant for us to go out and do our own research all over again when they're going to find the same things for the same area. So with council's blessing, I would ask that the clerk reach out to the county clerk as well as the county CAO to request access to that information, and recommend that they provide this to all other member municipalities. Some of the member municipalities have already done their own research. There is a cost associated to that, but it is imperative that we recognize the proper individuals who held the land prior to us being here, and that we acknowledge the land acknowledgement is very important and sacred, if you will. So unless I get any dissident from the council at hand, we'll ask the clerk to do that. Councillor Fody, or?
Sorry to interrupt, your worship, but just to add to your comments, it is in fact, we have had Indigenous peoples live in this township because I used to own land on which they were settled.
So, and this is why it's very important that we do it correctly and honor that tradition and those who came before us. So we will ask for guidance from the county, and failing that, then we'll have to embark on our own process. But I think it is important that we start to include this as part of our ritual, if you will. Okay. Other than that, that's all I have for mayor's update. Is there any other announcements that I've missed? Seeing none, the motion is on the floor from Councillor Opie, seconded by Councillor R.O.L., that the committee of whole adjourns. All those in favor? All those opposed? And we're carried.